The lights of the charity hall in Los Angeles glowed warm and soft as hundreds of guests filled the room. It was a special evening where artists and volunteers were honored for their acts of kindness. Among the crowd were two faces that instantly brought calm to the noise: Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. They walked in quietly, smiling at people, greeting staff, and taking their seats near the stage. The cameras followed them, but both looked more interested in the volunteers than in the flashing lights around them. Near the back of the hall, a young woman named Maya sat in her wheelchair, gripping a small bracelet made of blue beads. Her eyes shone with tears even before she reached the front row. She had dreamed of this moment for years, to see the people who unknowingly gave her strength when she had none left. She looked nervous, her breathing shallow, as if her heart carried a secret that wanted to break free. When Sandra stood to present an award to a hospital foundation, Maya suddenly raised her hand. The hall fell silent. Her voice trembled as she said, "I'm sorry, but I have waited too long to say this." She began to wheel herself forward, her eyes locked on Sandra. Security hesitated, unsure if they should stop her, but Sandra gently lifted her hand to let her continue. Everyone watched in silence, unsure what would happen next. Maya reached the edge of the stage and stopped. Her hands shook as she tried to speak. "You saved my life," she said, her voice breaking. She began to cry so hard she could barely breathe. The room grew tense. Cameras turned away as people whispered softly, thinking it was just an overwhelmed fan. Sandra's expression softened. She knelt down from the stage and held Maya's trembling hands. "Hey," Sandra whispered kindly. "It's all right. Take a deep breath. You're safe here." But Maya couldn't stop crying. She kept repeating the same words, "You saved my life," as if they carried all her pain. Her tears fell on Sandra's hands, and the crowd began to feel the weight of the moment. No one clapped, no one spoke, only the soft hum of lights filled the air. Keanu, who had been watching quietly from his seat, stood up and walked forward. He moved through the crowd slowly, his calm energy changing the whole atmosphere. When he reached Maya, he didn't say anything at first. He took off his black jacket and placed it around her shoulders. Then, in a gentle voice, he said, "Breathe with me, slowly, one breath at a time." He knelt beside her, matching her height, his presence steady and kind. Maya looked up through her tears, trying to follow his calm breathing. Little by little, her sobs began to slow. Sandra wiped her tears softly with a tissue, smiling faintly through her own emotion. "You're all right now," Keanu said quietly. "Whatever brought you here tonight, you're safe." Maya nodded weakly. Her hands still shook, but her voice found its way back. "I didn't come here just to meet you," she said. "I came to say thank you for saving me even when you didn't know me." The audience looked confused. Sandra asked softly, "What do you mean, Maya?" Maya smiled through her tears. "Years ago, I was in the hospital after a terrible accident. I lost my family. I didn't want to live anymore. But every night I watched your movie, Sandra. The way you spoke about hope, the way your characters never gave up, it made me want to try again. You reminded me what kindness looks like." Sandra covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. "Oh, my dear," she whispered. "I had no idea." She hugged Maya carefully so as not to hurt her. People in the crowd began to cry quietly, touched by the honesty in Maya's voice. Photographers lowered their cameras out of respect. It didn't feel like a celebrity moment. It felt like a deeply human one. Keanu stayed beside them, still calm. But there was something thoughtful in his eyes, as if Maya's words had unlocked an old memory he couldn't place. After a few moments, he said, "You know, sometimes we meet people who remind us why we must keep being kind. You've done that tonight." He smiled faintly at Maya, and she looked at him with gratitude that words couldn't describe. The host came forward to guide them backstage for privacy. But before they left, Maya asked softly, "Can I tell you something else?" Sandra nodded. Maya said, "I think I've met you before, Keanu," the crowd murmured. Sandra looked at her surprised. "Really?" Maya nodded again. "It was a long time ago in a hospital. I was a little girl. You were there sitting by my bed. You read me a story when I couldn't sleep. I never forgot your voice." The air froze for a second. Keanu looked at her closely, his eyes gentle but searching. He said quietly, "Maybe I did. I used to visit hospitals when I could, but I never told anyone. Maya smiled faintly. You read me a story about light, about how even a small candle can fight the dark. She paused, her voice trembling again. You were the first person who made me feel safe after the accident. Sandra looked at Keanu, tears streaming down her face. You never told me that, she whispered. Keanu smiled softly, still kneeling beside Maya. Some kindness doesn't need to be told, he said. It just needs to be passed on. The crowd remained completely silent, moved beyond words. Sandra gently held both their hands. Keanu turned to Maya and said, Thank you for remembering that story. You just gave me a reason to keep telling it. As they stood together on that stage, the hall filled with quiet warmth. The spotlight, once meant for fame, now shone on something far greater, compassion that had come full circle, and no one in that room would ever forget the moment when a fan cried, and two hearts healed together. The night after the charity event, news spread everywhere. Videos of Sandra hugging Maya and Keanu comforting her filled social media. Headlines called it the most emotional moment of the year. But what the cameras could not capture was what happened after the lights went off and the hall emptied. Backstage, Sandra sat with Maya in a quiet corner, holding her hand as she tried to calm down. Keanu stood nearby, speaking gently to a nurse who had come to help. Maya still looked shaken, but there was a calm glow on her face, like she had finally released something she had carried for years. Sandra said softly, You were so brave to speak like that in front of everyone. Maya smiled weakly. I didn't plan it. I just saw you both and my heart could not stay quiet anymore. Keanu brought a bottle of water and knelt beside her again. Sometimes our hearts know when to speak, he said in his calm voice. Maya looked at him carefully, still unsure if she truly believed her own memory. You really used to visit hospitals? She asked. Keanu nodded slowly. When I was younger, I would visit children who were alone. I never wanted anyone to know. I just felt peace there, reading stories and listening to them talk about their dreams. Maya's eyes filled again. I always wondered if I imagined you. I was so small and I was in pain all the time. But your voice stayed in my head. It became the sound I heard when I needed to be strong. Sandra listened quietly, her heart softening. She had worked with Keanu for years, yet he never spoke about things like this. She looked at him differently now, as if seeing another side of his soul. You always surprise me, she said quietly. Keanu smiled and shrugged. We all carry things we don't talk about. Kindness doesn't need to be loud. Outside, the media waited, but the three of them stayed hidden in that small backstage room, just talking. Maya shared her story slowly, her voice trembling at first. She told them about the accident that took her parents when she was only 10, how she spent months in the hospital, unable to walk, losing hope every day. She said that one night, a nurse told her, "A quiet man is here to read stories." She remembered being too weak to open her eyes, but she heard him read softly, telling her about light that never dies. When she finally looked up, she saw his face. I never forgot your eyes, she said to Keanu. You smiled like you understood pain. Keanu lowered his gaze, a shadow passing over his face. Sandra noticed and asked gently, Did you lose someone too? Keanu nodded after a long pause. Yes, he said quietly. I lost people I loved deeply. Maybe that is why I wanted to give something to those who were hurting. Sometimes when you can't save the ones you love, you try to save others. His voice broke a little, but he smiled again quickly, trying to ease the emotion in the air. Maya reached out and touched his hand. You did save me, she said softly. You didn't even know it. Keanu held her hand back gently, his eyes shining with quiet gratitude. Then Sandra said, Maya, can you come to our table tomorrow? We have a small dinner for charity volunteers. I want you to be there as our guest. Maya gasped softly. Me? Sandra nodded. Yes, you. You are part of this story now. That night, as Maya went home, she looked out of the car window, her bracelet of blue beads still shining faintly. She whispered, Thank you, Mama and Papa. I think you sent them to me. The next day, Sandra and Keanu met early at a cafe before the dinner event. They sat by the window, both quiet at first. People in the cafe smiled when they saw them, but no one disturbed them. Sandra stirred her coffee and said, "You know, last night felt like something more than a coincidence." Keanu nodded slowly. "I know, it felt like a circle closed after a long time." Sandra leaned closer. "What did you mean when you said you couldn't save the ones you loved?" Keanu looked at her for a moment, his expression heavy with old memories. "Someone I cared about got sick," he said softly. "I was always away working, trying to be strong. But when I came back, it was too late. After that, I promised myself I'd spend time where people needed company, not applause." Sandra looked at him with admiration. "That's why people feel calm around you," she said. "You don't just act kind. You carry kindness," he smiled faintly. "And you bring hope. That's what Maya saw in you." Later that evening, the dinner hall glittered with candles. Guests talked softly, unaware that something extraordinary was about to happen again. Maya arrived wearing a simple dress and the same bracelet. Sandra greeted her warmly, guiding her to a seat beside them. Keanu smiled as she rolled in. "You made it," he said. Maya nodded shyly. "I wouldn't miss it." As the night went on, the organizers began showing pictures of past hospital charity work on the big screen. There were volunteers, children, and doctors from different years. Suddenly, one picture flashed, a photo of a hospital ward from 15 years ago. In the corner of the image stood a man reading to a small girl in a bed. The girl's wrist had a blue beaded bracelet. The audience didn't notice it at first, but Sandra's eyes widened. She leaned forward. "Keanu," she whispered. "Look." Keanu looked at the screen, and his expression froze. He whispered, "That's her." Maya turned to see the screen, her hands shaking. "That's me," she whispered, tears forming. Everyone near them began to realize what they were seeing. The host stopped speaking as the photo stayed on the screen. The audience gasped softly, whispering among themselves. The room filled with quiet emotion as Sandra, Keanu, and Maya looked at each other. The truth had just found its voice through an old, forgotten photograph. Keanu leaned closer to Maya and said softly, "You see, sometimes the universe remembers what we forget." Maya nodded, crying again but smiling this time. "And sometimes kindness takes years to return," she said. The audience rose to their feet, clapping not for fame, but for the simple beauty of what they had just witnessed. Sandra stood and hugged them both tightly. Keanu looked at the crowd, humbled, and said only one sentence. "Thank you for reminding us that compassion is never lost." The hall filled with quiet applause, and the camera lights dimmed again. But for those three souls, it was not about cameras anymore. It was about life coming full circle through kindness. And that night, no one left untouched by the power of one gentle act. The next morning, sunlight poured softly through the curtains of Sandra's hotel room. She sat by the window, still thinking about the night before. The image of Maya as a little girl beside Keanu in that old hospital photo played over and over in her mind. It felt almost unreal, like life itself had written a scene better than any film they had ever done. She smiled faintly, whispering to herself, "The universe has its own script." Her phone buzzed gently. It was a message from Keanu. It read, "Good morning. Maya wants to meet us before her therapy session." "She said she has something important to tell us," Sandra replied. "I'll be ready in 20 minutes." By the time she reached the small cafe near the hospital, Maya was already there, sitting near the window with a soft scarf around her shoulders. Keanu sat beside her, quietly helping her unwrap a gift she had brought. It was a small glass jar filled with folded paper stars, each one a different color. Sandra smiled as she walked in. "Good morning, you two," she said gently. Maya smiled warmly. "Good morning. I made these stars myself during my recovery years. Each one holds a wish I made when I couldn't walk." She handed the jar to Sandra and said, "I want to give it to you both, because you helped me believe those wishes weren't impossible." Sandra took the jar carefully, feeling tears well up. "This is the most beautiful gift anyone could give," she said softly. Keanu looked at Maya with admiration. "You didn't just survive, Maya," he said. "You created hope out of pain." For a few moments, they sat in silence, watching the morning light touch the glass jar. Then Maya said quietly, "I have something else to tell you." She looked nervous but determined. "After the accident, I didn't just lose my family. I lost everything that made me feel human. The doctors said I might never walk again. I hated everyone. I hated myself. But one day, a nurse brought me a small radio and played an interview of you, Keanu. You said pain teaches us how deep kindness can go. I wrote that down and kept it on my wall. That sentence changed everything. Keanu's eyes softened. You remember that? He asked. Maya nodded. Yes, I still have that paper. I read it every night before sleeping. Sandra reached out, holding her hand. You turned pain into power, she said. That takes more courage than anything. Maya looked at her and whispered, but I'm not done yet. I want to help others like me. I've started a small online community where patients talk about recovery and share stories of hope. I called it the Gentle Hands Project. I want both of you to be part of it. Keanu smiled gently. That's a beautiful name. And of course we'll help. Sandra nodded eagerly. We'll support it however we can. As they talked, a small group of people at the cafe began to notice them. But instead of disturbing them, they just watched quietly, touched by the peace in their faces. When Maya left for her therapy, Keanu and Sandra stayed behind for a while. Sandra looked at him and said softly, You changed her life twice, Keanu. Once as a stranger and once as a friend. Keanu shook his head humbly. No, she changed mine. She reminded me that what we do in silence sometimes echoes louder than fame ever could. They both sat quietly for a while, sipping coffee and watching the city move outside. But then, something unexpected happened. A middle-aged woman approached their table, her hands trembling slightly. Excuse me, she said nervously. I saw you both last night on television. I work at St. Mary's Hospital. Years ago, we used to have a volunteer who read stories to children every weekend. We never knew his name, but the nurses called him the quiet man with the light stories. She looked straight at Keanu. Was that you? Keanu paused for a long moment, then nodded softly. Yes, ma'am. I think it was. The woman's eyes filled with tears. My daughter was one of those children. She passed away years later, but she used to talk about you. She said the quiet man told her that brave hearts are never forgotten. I want to thank you for that. Keanu stood up, moved beyond words. He placed his hand over his heart and said gently, Thank you for telling me that. She taught me something too. The woman smiled faintly and said, You gave her light when there was only pain. You deserve to know that. When she left, Sandra sat still, watching Keanu's eyes glisten. You never take credit, she said softly. He smiled a little. Because kindness isn't a performance, it's a promise. The next day, news channels began covering the charity event in more detail. One article wrote, Hollywood stars reminded the world that compassion still lives in silence. Another said, Keanu's gentle act and Sandra's kindness created a moment the world will never forget. But the three people at the heart of it stayed quiet. Maya spent her days working on her project, while Keanu and Sandra continued supporting her behind the scenes. One evening, Sandra received a message from Maya. It read, Something strange happened today. The hospital called me. They found a donation made years ago for children's therapy equipment. It was made under the name A Friend of Light. They said it came from the same year you visited me, Keanu. Was that you? Sandra read the message and looked up at Keanu, who was sitting beside her in her living room. He smiled softly, almost shyly. Maybe, he said quietly. I don't remember what name I used. I just wanted the kids to have better machines. Sandra looked at him, speechless. You never stop, do you? Keanu shrugged gently. You don't stop breathing kindness when it becomes part of who you are. The following week, Maya invited them to visit her hospital therapy center. It was small but filled with color. Children laughed as they painted stars on the walls. Volunteers moved between rooms, bringing snacks and music. Maya smiled proudly as she showed them around. This is where hope lives now, she said. Then one little boy rolled toward them in a wheelchair, holding a small paper star. Are you the man from the picture? He asked Keanu. Keanu knelt beside him and smiled. Maybe. Do you like stories? The boy nodded excitedly. Keanu said softly, Then I'll read you one someday, and maybe you'll tell one back. The boy smiled wide, holding out the paper star. This one's for you. Keanu took it carefully, looking at the tiny words written on it, for those who help others shine. He looked up at Maya, his voice gentle. "You're passing it on already." Sandra watched them both, her heart full. She whispered to herself, "Kindness never ends. It only changes hands." And in that moment, the world outside seemed quieter, brighter, and far more beautiful than before. A week later, the quiet story that started inside one charity hall began to spread far beyond what anyone expected. A short clip of Keanu placing his jacket on Maya had gone viral again, this time reaching millions across the world. People called it the moment kindness returned to Hollywood. News outlets kept replaying it, and comments flooded every platform with words like "faith restored." The world needs more souls like them, and real heroes still exist. But for Keanu, Sandra, and Maya, the attention felt strange. They had lived the moment, felt its truth, and now it was becoming a headline. Sandra looked at her phone one morning and sighed softly. "Look at this," she said, showing Keanu an article titled, "The Actor Who Healed a Fan's Heart." He smiled faintly. "They always make it sound bigger than it was." Sandra shook her head. "No, Keanu, they're not making it bigger. They're just finally seeing what real kindness looks like." Maya called them later that morning. Her voice sounded a little nervous. "There are reporters outside the hospital. They want to film my therapy sessions," she said. Keanu replied calmly, "We'll handle it together. No one should turn your healing into a show." Sandra agreed. "Let's meet there. We'll make sure this stays about kindness, not fame." An hour later, they arrived at the hospital. Cameras were already waiting outside. When Keanu stepped out, the crowd began cheering softly. He raised his hand politely and said, "Please, everyone, this story isn't about a movie star or a fan. It's about what kindness does when no one is watching." His calm tone made the reporters quiet down. He continued, "Maya is the real story. She turned her pain into something that helps others heal. That's where your focus should be." Maya rolled forward beside him, her confidence growing as she spoke. "I didn't come here for fame. I just wanted to thank the people who reminded me that life can still be good. But now I see something bigger. People from all over the world are writing to me. They want to join the Gentle Hands Project. They want to bring kindness into hospitals, schools, and streets." The cameras captured her shining face, and for a moment, the noise of the media turned into quiet admiration. Inside the hospital, doctors greeted them warmly. One nurse whispered to Sandra, "She's changing lives already. Last night, 5 new volunteers signed up because of her story." Sandra smiled proudly. That's what happens when one kind act meets another. After the press left, they spent the afternoon in the therapy hall. Children played soft music while volunteers painted more paper stars on the walls. Keanu joined one boy named Emil, who was building a wooden puzzle. "Want some help?" he asked. The boy grinned. "Only if you can fix the missing piece." Keanu laughed quietly. "I'm good at finding lost things." Emil handed him a piece that didn't fit anywhere. Keanu turned it around slowly, then smiled. Sometimes the wrong piece just needs a new angle. He pressed it gently, and it clicked perfectly into place. The boy clapped in delight, shouting, "You did it!" Keanu looked at him and said, "No, you did. You just needed someone to believe you could." Sandra watched from across the room, smiling at the scene. She turned to Maya and said softly, "You see what I mean? He doesn't even realize how healing he is." Maya nodded. "That's what makes it real." Later that evening, the hospital director approached them. "We'd like to honor both of you," she said, "for your generosity and inspiration." Keanu immediately shook his head. "Please honor the staff and volunteers instead. They do this every day." Sandra smiled. "He's right. The quiet hearts deserve the loud applause." But the director insisted, "Then at least let us name the therapy room after the message you've shared with the world. We'd like to call it the Gentle Room of Light." Keanu and Sandra exchanged a look, both humbled and touched. "That sounds beautiful," Sandra said. Maya smiled widely. "That's perfect. That's what you read to me long ago, Keanu. The story about light that never dies." The ceremony took place the next week. People from around the world sent letters and video messages thanking them for showing humanity again. One message came from a teacher in Japan who said her students started a kindness wall after watching the video. Another came from a nurse in India who said she now tells patients about Maya's story to give them hope. Sandra read them aloud, her voice trembling. This is bigger than us, she whispered. Keanu nodded, his eyes full of quiet gratitude. It's proof that kindness multiplies. It travels faster than anything else. As the small ceremony ended, Maya rolled to the center of the new therapy room. The walls were painted soft yellow and sunlight poured in through wide windows. She raised her head proudly and said, "This is for everyone who ever thought kindness doesn't matter. It saved my life, and maybe it can save someone else's too." The crowd clapped gently, and Sandra hugged her, whispering, "You're leading now, Maya, and that's the best ending we could hope for." Maya smiled. "No, it's not the ending. It's the beginning." After everyone left, only the three of them stayed behind. The light through the window hit the wall where the new plaque hung, the gentle room of light, where kindness never fades. Keanu touched the edge of the plaque and said softly, "Every good thing comes from someone's quiet choice to care." Sandra turned to him. "You think your visit all those years ago led to this moment?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, one story told in a hospital bed started this chain, and now it belongs to everyone." Maya looked up at them, her voice tender. "You gave me a reason to believe again. Now it's my turn to pass it on." As they left the hospital, the sun was setting in golden light. The crowd outside had gone. Only a few nurses waved from the windows. Keanu stopped near the gate and looked back at the glowing building. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes the world remembers your kindness long after you've forgotten it." Sandra smiled and answered, "And sometimes it brings you back to see what your heart built." The evening breeze carried their laughter as they walked to the car. None of them noticed a man filming from afar, a documentary maker inspired by their story. He whispered quietly into his camera, "This isn't about celebrities. It's about compassion coming home." And that moment would soon become something far greater than they ever imagined. Weeks passed, yet the world still spoke about the charity night. The story had traveled to every corner of the internet, but something deeper was happening quietly behind the scenes. Schools, hospitals, and community centers began creating their own gentle hands corners where people shared acts of kindness. Small notes appeared on walls, each starting with the same words because of Maya's story. Maya herself grew stronger every day. She had begun to walk short distances during therapy, her smile brighter than ever. Sandra and Keanu often visited, not as celebrities but as friends. One morning, they arrived to surprise her, carrying flowers and a small box of notebooks for the children. When Maya saw them, she laughed softly. "You two never stop bringing light, do you?" Keanu smiled. "We just follow yours." They spent the morning talking with patients, listening to their stories. One teenage girl told Sandra that after watching the video, she stopped feeling ashamed of her wheelchair. Another young boy told Keanu that he had started reading stories to his younger sister at night, just like the quiet man once did for him. Keanu looked at him with warmth and said, "Keep that light alive. It's how the world heals." Later, Maya asked them to come to the rooftop garden. When they reached it, they found a small tree planted in the center with ribbons tied to its branches. Each ribbon carried a message of gratitude. One read, "For the ones who never gave up on me." Another said, "Because someone believed I could smile again." Sandra touched one of the ribbons and whispered, "This tree has more power than any award." Maya nodded. "We call it the kindness tree. Every patient adds a ribbon when they find hope again." Keanu stood silently for a moment, looking at the tree swaying in the wind. "It's growing stronger," he said. "Just like you." Then Maya took a deep breath. "There's something else I need to show you." She rolled closer to the edge of the rooftop, where a new sign had been placed on the wall. It read, "Dedicated to the man who read stories in the dark, and to the woman who reminded us to believe again." Sandra looked at Keanu with tears in her eyes. "That's you," she whispered. Keanu smiled humbly. "No, that's all of us." Before leaving, Maya looked at them and said softly, "I used to think my life ended with the accident, but now I know it just changed direction. You both showed me that kindness doesn't erase pain. It transforms it." As they stood under the setting sun, Sandra placed her hand on Maya's shoulder. "You've become the storyteller now," she said. "We just helped you find your voice." Maya smiled through tears. "Then I'll use it well." They walked away together, leaving the garden glowing with ribbons and light. Behind them, a little boy tied a new ribbon to the tree. It read, "For Maya, Keanu, and Sandra, thank you for teaching the world to care." The next month brought a quiet peace to everyone who had been part of the journey. The attention had faded, but the spirit of that night lived on. Schools were painting stars on classroom walls. Hospitals were starting story corners for patients. And strangers were helping each other using the same phrase that began it all. Be gentle. Be kind. Maya had become a symbol of hope for many. Her gentle hands project now had hundreds of volunteers, and her name was known across the world. But one afternoon, she sent a message to Sandra and Keanu, asking them to meet her again at the Gentle Room of Light. She wrote, "I want to thank you one last time, but in my own way." When they arrived, the hall looked different. The children and staff had decorated it with candles, paintings, and paper stars. At the front stood Maya, standing without her wheelchair for the first time. Her hands shook slightly, but her smile glowed brighter than ever. "You're walking," Sandra said, tears instantly forming. Maya nodded. "I promised myself I'd stand to thank the people who helped me believe." Keanu walked closer, his voice soft with emotion. "We never helped you walk, Maya. You carried yourself here with courage," she smiled. "Courage only grows when someone waters it with kindness." Then she pointed to a screen behind her. "I have something to show you." The lights dimmed and a video began to play. It showed children, doctors, nurses, and strangers from around the world holding signs that read, "Thank you for the gentle act." There were clips from different countries. A child in India planting a tree, a teacher in Brazil reading stories to sick students, a man in Japan leaving free meals for strangers. Every face carried the same smile, quiet, real, full of hope. Maya's voice played softly in the background, saying, "A story told in kindness never ends. It travels from heart to heart, changing the world without noise." As the video ended, silence filled the hall. Then the children began to clap softly, followed by the adults until the entire room echoed with applause. Sandra wiped her tears. "You did this, Maya. You built something beautiful." Maya shook her head gently. "No, we did this together. You gave me a reason to dream again. Keanu gave me peace when I was lost, and now I want to give that back." She picked up a small golden star from a table and handed it to Keanu. "This is for you, the quiet man with the light stories." Then she turned to Sandra with another star. "And this is for you, the voice that taught me to believe again." They both accepted the stars with tears in their eyes, but Keanu said softly, "You forgot one thing, Maya. The brightest star is you." The hall grew emotional again. People hugged, children laughed, and cameras captured not fame but pure humanity. Keanu looked around and whispered to Sandra, "The world feels lighter today." She nodded, because kindness finally found a voice. Before leaving, Keanu quietly walked to the kindness tree on the rooftop. He tied a white ribbon that read, "For everyone who chooses compassion even when no one is watching." When he turned around, Sandra was standing behind him. She smiled softly and said, "You've been that person all along." Keanu replied, "And you've been the reminder that kindness needs both words and actions." As they walked out into the cool evening, they saw Maya surrounded by children who called her their teacher. The sun was setting behind the hospital, bathing everything in golden light. The three of them stood together, watching the horizon glow. Maya said, "Do you think people will remember this?" Keanu looked at her gently. "They already do. Every time someone helps a stranger, this story lives again," Sandra added quietly. "It started with a fan's tears and ended with a world smiling." Maya laughed softly. "No, it didn't end. Kindness never ends. It just finds new hands." As the sun slipped below the city, the gentle room of light shimmered behind them, filled with laughter, ribbons, and hope. And though cameras had long stopped rolling, that single moment, a fan crying, a star comforting, and kindness spreading, became something no one could ever forget. It was never about fame. It was about humanity remembering how to care again.